Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome. The first thing I'd like to do is to have you meet the 42nd President of the United States, William Jefferson Clinton. Mr. President, because of your last visit here, more than 100 students were able to stay in college as a result. And audience, we'd like you to know that because you're being here today, the same thing will happen. More students will stay in college, graduate, take courses that are pertinent to their work in the future, and they will get better jobs as a result. And the economic impact on Westchester County for 1 year's graduates is $420 million. So we thank you both. It's now my pleasure to introduce the chairman of our Board of Trustees, Tim Carey, who will bestow an honorary doctorate upon President Clinton.
Thank you, Joe. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As chairman of the Board of Trustees, I'd like to recognize our Board of Trustees and Foundation Board members. If they would please stand and be recognized. Conferring honorary degrees is the highest form of recognition by the State University of New York to persons of exceptional distinction. The purpose of honorary degrees are to honor excellence, honor meritorious and outstanding service to the university, to the state of New York, to the United States, or to humanity at large, and to recognize men and women whose lives and significant achievements serve as examples of the university's aspirations for its diverse student body. As a two-term President of the United States and during more than 40 years of public service, President Bill Clinton has been dedicated to improving both the state of the nation and the state of the world at large. In his role as governor of Arkansas, President, and into his active post-presidency, he has pursued a wide variety of interests and efforts that have greatly affected society. Among his wide-ranging and historic achievements, he led an intervention with NATO, which brought peace to the Bosnian conflict. He headed the United Nations relief effort to aid the victims of the Asian tsunami. He championed programs to increase jobs, eliminate prejudice, and promote pluralism. He led an extensive education reform effort in Arkansas, and the improvement of the educational system was one of his highest priorities as president, and it remains so as past president. He formulated policies which led to the country's college enrollment rate rising to its highest level in history. He established the Clinton Foundation to improve global health, strengthen economies, and protect the environment by fostering partnerships among businesses, governments, non-governmental organizations, and private citizens. With this citation, he is being recognized for his commitment to excellence, his compassion for the understanding members of the global community, and his resolve to improve the lives of others through education. In light of these notable accomplishments, the state of New York, the University of New York, bestows upon you, Mr. President, its honorary Doctorate of Humane Letters.
Thank you very much. I want to thank first my longtime friend, Dr. Joe Hankin, for inviting me here. Thank you, Tim, for the honorary degree. I am particularly glad to have it from this institution because I am almost positive that I was the first president ever to give a commencement address at a community college. I have for a long time, I have believed that community colleges were kind of a good metaphor, a symbol for what we should be doing to organize ourselves in the 21st century. They're open to everybody. The curriculum is constantly changing. The community is heavily involved in shaping what the students study. It's supposed to be both stimulating and useful. In other words, it works the way Washington doesn't most of the time. And you laugh about it, but think about it. We are living in a time that is full of enormous possibility and full of enormous difficulty. All over the world, people are struggling to create enough jobs for their young people. All over the world, people are struggling to build a strategy that will provide broadly shared prosperity and not increasing inequality. All over the world, people are trying to find a way to deal with the problem of climate change in a way that's good economics, not one that will impoverish us. And all over the world, people are trying to find a way to say, my identity matters to me. I'm glad I'm who I am. But it doesn't require me to be negative about someone else. This whole question of identity in a community college network context is fabulous. You go into a community college and you see people who come from all over the world, every race, every religious background, every conceivable kind of diversity. Heck, here you may even have an 18-year-old running for city council. And that's the good part about the modern world. If we learn to manage our diversity, we'll be fine. That's what I think the community colleges do a good job of. If we learn to engage in a process of continuous improvement, we'll be fine. As I look at the United States and other advanced economies, I see constantly evidence that their biggest challenges are, first, reforming the systems that need to be changed in order to modernize and create opportunity again. And second, learning to live together with all our diversity. Where we do it, we're successful. Where we don't, we suffer. So I think that the community colleges of America, and I think Westchester College will be more important in the years ahead even than it has been in the past. I'm glad that I wasn't right about everything, but I am glad that I was right about going as president to give a commencement speech to a community college and telling the American people that this is the kind of organization our country and the world needs for the 21st century. Creative cooperation works a lot better than constant conflict. Thank you very much.
In my remarks, I forgot to introduce some of our dignitaries that are here, in particular, the head of the Democrat in the state Senate, my friend, Senator Stuart Cousins, if she would stand. Assemblywoman Sandy Galliff is here, she would stand. My friend and our landlord, actually, County Executive Rob Astorino is here, if he would stand. And a shout out to my good friend, former County Executive Andy Spano. Andy, thank you for all your help all those years.
And now, to get the conversation started, I'd like to introduce to you our moderator, Les Crystal.
The Clinton Global Initiative has such a wide range. In addition to education, you've done global health, income inequality, child obesity, climate change, health and wellness, and probably some things that I've forgotten. And one of the most interesting things you established was the Clinton Global Initiative University. And 6 years ago, you founded it, and you bring student leaders and teachers together. And all the people who attend are required to make commitments. Tell us about some of the best commitments that your Clinton Global Initiative University has brought forth.
Well, first of all, let me put it in context just for the people that don't know much about it. Our foundation runs a lot of direct programs in healthcare, in economic development, especially in agriculture in Latin America and Africa. And we have a huge childhood obesity initiative and a wellness initiative in the United States. The Clinton Global Initiative is something we do for other people largely. That is, at the opening of the UN every year, we meet for 2.5 days and ask people to make commitments. We get the world leaders that are coming for the UN and business leaders, philanthropists, non-governmental groups, and others. So a few years ago, we decided we should probably try to do this for university students. They wouldn't have any money, but they'd have the great ideas. And sure enough, they have. I mean, we've had an amazing number of ideas, but I'll just give you two that came out of this year's. We just met at Washington University in St. Louis, and I was going through an exhibition of some of our better commitments, and there were 4 young students from Northwestern University who had been trying to come up with a way of dealing with the problem of prescription drug abuse. There are now more young people die every year from prescription drug abuse than from heroin and cocaine combined in America. And a lot of it is because they literally don't know that they're risking their lives under certain circumstances. For example, if you go out and drink beer, and then you say, well, I think I'd like a buzz, and you take one of these opiates like OxyContin to get a buzz after the beer. The problem is if you fall asleep, you could die because the combined impact of the alcohol and the drug is to shut down the part of your brain that tells your body to keep breathing. So there's all kinds of problems with this. People buy these prescription drugs under false pretenses, and then they empty them out, sell them one at a time to other people. Or sometimes people are really just addicted and they take out 2 when they should take 1. So these young people at Northwestern developed a simple chip that could be inserted in the plastic top of the pill bottle that would tell you whenever it was being misused. If they were being emptied, if 2 were taken out instead of 1, and you could alert the pharmacy, the doctor, or the local authorities if you wanted to. Very low cost, high impact thing that might save several lives, several thousand lives a year. So that's one example. Another example was a group of science students from the University of California developed a $100 hospital sanitation piece of equipment using a simple neon light technology. And that's really important because all over the world, even in the United States, several thousand people die a year because of exposure to infections in hospitals. And this little device, you can put it at all the critical junctures in a person's journey through the hospital, and it'll kill the bacteria. So those are just 2 examples. I could give you lots and lots of others. There are people that have come up with ways to make childhood nutrition supplements, which is very important. If a child has AIDS, for example, I can get them the medicine, but if their body is too malnourished, you can put the medicine in and it'll go right through. So we had a young person from Texas actually come up with a plan to develop a childhood supplement that would be simple, inexpensive, and save a lot of lives. So these young people have done a lot of remarkable things.
Very encouraging, and having been a graduate at Northwestern, it was nice to hear that anecdote. In your travels and so on, I know you're just back from Latin America. I believe you said recently that you now feel that jobs are the world's most critical problem, even more than global health, though it's hard to make that comparison. And I think you were in 2 countries just recently in Latin America to push forward one of your programs. Is the problem getting solved, or is it still insurmountable for us?
Obviously, if you don't have your health, it's the biggest problem in the world. So I don't want to minimize that, but the point I wanted to make is if you look in the last dozen years or so, just since I left the White House, we are making real progress in reducing infant mortality around the world and reducing the death rate from AIDS and tuberculosis and malaria. There's a lot of progress that's been made in healthcare. Meanwhile, there is a global jobs crisis. If you remember when young people gathered in Tahrir Square in Cairo at the start of the Arab Spring, part of the problem was that the universities were graduating 400,000 young people a year, and the economy was not creating anywhere near 400,000 jobs for university graduates. So I think that we would all have to admit that nowhere, and certainly not in the United States, have we developed the capacity to really drive down unemployment and also start increasing the rate of participation in the workforce again. Keep in mind, folks, when you see the unemployment rate, that's the unemployment rate among people who have officially registered as looking for jobs. So if we've actually had quite a few people quit looking in the last few years because of the impact of the crash in 2008. So yes, I think it's a big problem. But I think that there are hopeful solutions. I believe in America, if we can make a few more changes in our technology laws that would generate some more jobs, I believe that we could create an enormous number of jobs in building a 21st century infrastructure, including modern broadband infrastructure in every part of America. In Latin America, where I was working, we have tried to perfect an economic model that would help in very low income areas. And basically doing two things. One is creating a supply chain so that the farmers and the fishermen get a fair price for their product. And I won't bore you with the details, but we basically double or triple or quadruple their incomes in a way that is sustainable, so it's a good market. And then we're trying to go the other way. In the remote Andean, in the Andes, remote villages, we have people actually selling products there that have never been brought before. We're trying to create a whole new class of women entrepreneurs who can take modern products to remote villages and do it in a way that's economically sustainable. So I spend a lot of time trying to figure this out because I think that my experience has been since I was a boy that if everybody's got a job who wants one, about 90% of the problems will work themselves out. And that work is the most important thing. So we're doing our best. And it's going to be important for everyone else. There are now 7 billion people on Earth. There will be 9 billion by 2050. What are they all going to do? And among other things, we hope they're going to feed the rest of us. So we need a very high productivity but labor-intensive farming model that works in Latin America and Africa and East Asia that I'm trying to help refine and implement. It's exciting, but I'm on balance, I'm pretty optimistic.
Well, that's good to hear. I'd like to turn for a few moments to the presidency. And as you're probably aware, that there's been a history of difficulties in a second term for a president. And it appears this week, certainly, that President Obama has had a big bump in his second term with the furor over the IRS targeting conservative groups and the hearings about Benghazi and the securing of reporters' phone logs and so on. I'd like to get your reaction to the significance of these and how they may affect presidency going forward.
Well, I think first of all, no one that I'm aware of has suggested that the president or anybody in the White House knowingly did anything unlawful. And so therefore it's not Watergate or Iran-Contra or something like that. I think what he did in showing immediate outrage at even the appearance that certain conservative groups were targeted and trying to get to the bottom of it, I think that's the right thing to do. This is not an inconsiderable thing. All of you should know, however, that this is a problem we're going to have for a long time to come, because with the Congress has given tax-exempt status to these groups that have a political orientation, as long as they do not specifically advocate for a particular candidate. And obviously, if you watched any of the endless television ads that have graced our screens in the last several election cycles, you know that that's sometimes a hard line to draw. So I think the real thing is that they've got to find a way to evaluate all these groups based not on what their names are or what their ideology is, but on what they do. And nobody should be exempt from a uniform standard, and no one should be targeted because of their some word in their name. So I think that they'll clean that up, and they should, and I think it'll come out all right. I've read all the things that have come out in the Benghazi hearings. As nearly as I can tell, none of them have materially called into question the report done by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mullen, and by Ambassador Pickering, probably the most highly regarded diplomat in America today. And he did great work for me. He's got a 40, 50-year career. He's an amazing man. And I think they said what happened there. I don't understand. I literally read it over and over again. I keep reading this stuff, trying to figure out what is the so-called scandal. The real issue is you had 2 CIA contractors and an ambassador and a person working for the ambassador who were killed in Benghazi in 2 different sites. The CIA site had a rather large number of people who were authorized to be heavily armed. And still they were killed. It was a very difficult thing. The report that was filed actually did a lot to say, look, if you're going to put diplomatic posts in these dangerous positions, and they're going to be diplomats, that is, you can't keep them inside the building. If you want them to get out and relate to people, then you ought to do these things to try to minimize the chances of further deaths. And I think that that's the proper response. I still am amazed that there's been almost no attention given to the one authoritative report that was done by people without a political axe to grind, and one way or the other. And it's a tough report. It says, here's what we should do to do this better in the future, and that's what I think we should be focused on. I don't know anything about that other thing, the reporter thing. I understand it's related to trying to find out who in the White House leaked, or who in the wherever they were in the government leaked certain confidential information. And if it's lawful what they did, basically, then the press is saying might be lawful, but we just believe leaks are always good and that you can't restrict them without undermining the freedom of the press. And that's all I know. I've just been listening, but I'm not familiar enough with the facts to have an informed opinion on that. But I do on the other things. That's what I think. I think they'll work through this IRS thing, and they ought to. Nothing's more chilling than thinking that the government's after you because of your name or because of your politics, and nobody wants that. On the Benghazi thing, I think they ought to look at what the Admiral Mullen and Ambassador Pickering's report said, because that is what's really important. How can we minimize the chances of fatalities while sending our diplomats into difficult situations?
Watching the hearings, both on Benghazi and on the IRS situation, it certainly brought back into focus the whole sense of gridlock in Washington. What kind of advice would you have for President Obama under these circumstances to be able to move ahead? The problems with gun regulation in terms of getting legislation passed, and the sequestration was passed. In this kind of atmosphere moving forward in terms of legislation that he would like and projects he'd like to have done?
Well, I was a little surprised that Senator Manchin and Senator Toomey's background check bill didn't pass, because it was a bipartisan bill sponsored by two people, a Democrat from West Virginia and a Republican from Pennsylvania, who both had high ratings with the NRA. And it's, I think, a real testimony to the paralysis there. And also, the members may be still, even though 90% of the people say they favor background checks, the truth is that since I passed the assault weapons bill in 1994, and which had a limit of 10 bullets in the ammunition capacity too, then the NRA was very active in the substantial losses that the Democrats suffered in 94. I've said many times, I think they personally beat a minimum of 12 of our House members. And so it scared all the members of Congress. They say, oh yeah, everybody says, well, why don't you be brave? But the people who wanted responsible gun legislation had in the past been unable to protect people who supported them, even though and it may seem perplexing to a lot of you, because you say, well, if a measure is 70 to 30, for it, 70% of the people are for it, 30% against it, how can it possibly be bad politics to vote against it? The answer is, if only 10% of the 70% will vote against you if you disagree with them, but 20% of the 30% will vote against you, then the real poll is 20 to 10. And plus, this bill is not a big radical bill. It just says we're now selling a lot of guns at gun shows and over the internet. If you go into a gun store, you get a background check. Why shouldn't you get a background check at the gun show and over the internet? So I see that this is what I read in the paper. I hadn't talked to anybody, but it looks like to me the Senator Manchin and Senator Toomey are trying to address some of the concerns of the rural legislators from Alaska, and first one place another. And if they do, I still think they might pass that. I think they ought to go back, and I think they should try to pass an immigration bill this year. I think that would make a difference. And I think there's some evidence that the number of the Republicans want to pass it, as you see. I think the results of the last election had something to do with that. It's very difficult to be a competitive national party if you lose more than 70% of the Hispanic vote. But for whatever reason, I think that if members of the Congress on a bipartisan basis are willing to work on this, they should. So that's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see them just find something and pass something. Something that, you know, it matters. Just if they got in the habit of doing it. I thought it was funny. Right at the first of the year, I thought we were going to have a better run because the Speaker Boehner abandoned their previous rule that he would not let a bill come to the vote in the House unless a majority of his own caucus was for it. So that meant he was going to block tons of bills that would easily pass because the conservatives in his caucus were against it. He abandoned that when it came to the Violence Against Women Act and one or two other bills early in this term, and just let the Congress pass it with a big, overwhelming bipartisan margin. So I was hoping we'd have more of that. And we might again if we get, it'll be interesting to see if they can figure out how to pass the gun registration bill in the Senate, then he'll have to cross that Rubicon in the House. But there's some chance we could get an immigration bill out, and I think it would be a good thing if we did. You all say that you hate this, but you elected those people. I mean, you can say we didn't in New York, but you've got to face this fact. You can't. The American people complain about Washington. There's not a single soul casting a single vote there that wasn't properly elected. And part of it is that the American people have voting habits that are radically different in presidential years and off years. So that in the midterm elections, the electorate is older, a little bit wealthier, and much more conservative. So the election, it seems crazy. How could President Obama win in 2008 and 2012 and take a huge whipping in 2010? One big answer is a different crowd showed up both times.
Indeed.
Which is one reason that Republicans worked so hard on trying to make it hard to vote in 2012. They were trying to make the election look more like the 2010 electorate. But if you looked for example, when they cut the advanced voting in half in Florida and said that there could be no advanced voting on the Sunday before the election, something African Americans had done in Florida for decades, it backfired. And I remember turning on television one night about a week before the election, and I saw this fury in the eyes of these African American and Latino voters who were having to wait 4 and 5 hours. They also didn't have as many voting places for them in advance voting. They were having to wait 4 and 5 hours to vote, not on election day, but in advance voting. So that didn't work. So now that didn't work, they ought to pass immigration reform. It'd be great for students. It'd be great for normalizing life in places like New York, including Westchester County.
Do you think that Do you think the political polarization is worse now than when you were president or before? How could you do you have a historical perspective on it?
Well, I'd say it's probably more institutionalized now. I mean, as far as I know, nobody's accused President Obama of murder yet. They accuse me of murder. The Republican right is ardent in believing that there's something really horribly wrong with all of us, especially when we win. And I say that because, and there are a lot of really appealing to me Republican office holders, but they have to, but they're appealing because they try to represent everybody. And I think that's what you've got to do. You know, we need conservatives and liberals, we need Republicans and Democrats, but if they just refuse to work with them, it's my way or the highway. It's a prescription for failure. Nobody is right all the time. Nobody. It's impossible. These are highly complex problems. And what bothers me is if Washington gets to the point where all they want to do is have hearings and tear each other down, who's going to build things up? We need to be doing things to build the country. You know, we're coming out of this recession finally. The annual deficit has already, did you know this? The annual deficit has dropped by more than 40% this year, which proves just what I was saying all along, that you can't balance the budget without three things. You have to have appropriate spending controls, appropriate revenues, and economic growth. So what you see in the budget reports coming out of Washington is this growth coming back in the American economy. Now's the time when we ought to be working together to try to create more jobs and figure out how to accelerate this and make sure that we can keep this going and make it beneficial to all Americans. And that's what I'm worried about more than anything else. That's why I like the idea of the immigration bill. If they could pass immigration reform, I think it would be uplifting to both parties. I do think it would help the Republicans. That would be fine with me, because they'd have to do something. They'd earn it. You know, they'd say, here's the good immigration bill. And it would help our country to grow together. And then we should pivot back to some of these economic issues. This is just going to, you don't want to be small when you're in a building period. We need to be in a building period now. And we need to be bigger, which is not to say that people shouldn't be satisfied about the Benghazi business or the IRS, which is a more direct example of at least an error at the very least. But you need to be making something good happen. People need to take a little time off to make something good happen.
Yeah, some have mentioned that leads to a kind of lack of confidence in government.
Well, it does, yeah. And again, I don't think that you want to say to people, can't look at this, that, or the other thing, but in the case of the IRS thing, that's a classic example of where something was done that shouldn't have been done. So they need to find out what it was and fix it. We had what happened at Benghazi thoroughly examined. So it raised the question of whether most of this is politics. But you've got to make something good happen. You can't just be all the time swatting flies. This country is not totally recovered from the aftermath of all the economic blows we took in the previous decade. And there's lots of things to do. It's an exciting time. We could be making a lot of good things happen. And so I'd like to see them do more of that. And that's, like I said, it could be that I was wrong about what happened at the beginning of the year. I thought it was going to be better. But I do think if they passed immigration reform, it might psychologically have a positive impact.
Turning point. I'd like to turn to foreign affairs for just a moment. I recall your expressing regret over having not taken action in Rwanda, and we certainly all recall the success in Bosnia. And looking now at the situation in Syria, with more than 70, 80,000 killed and no end, do you think the United States should intervene, should do more than it's doing?
I think it's a very hard question, because most everybody believes President Assad, most everybody that I talk to anyway, believes President Assad overreacted to the people who were protesting against him, killed too many people, created too many exiles. There are refugee camps all over Jordan now, imposing unconscionable burdens on that country. A lot of people have been killed. I don't know everything that has been done or is being considered. I do not believe that we should directly intervene militarily, but it might be that we might have the option to do more than we're doing, and I don't know about that. I hesitate to second guess, and I haven't done it. I didn't do it for President Bush either. I don't want to try to second guess a lot of these things, but here's the problem. a lot of people are worried that if Assad goes without a Lebanese-like structure in place, that instead of this being a victory for democracy, it will be a victory for the most militant Islamists, because they'll be the best organized. And by the way, we've seen this movie before, haven't we? I mean, you know, where the young, well-educated, middle-class leads a political upheaval, and then there's an election and they don't have any organization on the ground and they lose, and then the people who win don't seem to believe in minority rights and freedom of religion and all of that. So that's what we're all worried about, what comes after Assad. So do I think that we may be able to do some more? Maybe. Do I think we should have boots on the ground? No. But there are some other things we can do. I just hope we're also working like crazy on how to set up a system afterward. You know, Lebanon was nearly destroyed in the 70s with the Civil War because they had, you know, they had Sunni and Shia Muslims, they had Maronite Christians, they had the Druze. So they drew up a constitution which said we'll have parliamentary elections that will be democratic, but the prime minister will be a Sunni. The president, I think, is a Maronite. I believe that's right. The Speaker of the House is a Shiite. And they've been able to accommodate a lot of various political changes in their neighborhood, including the Hezbollah-related party losing an election and giving up power because they were able to protect the minorities. So I think we could be a lot more aggressive in our hopes if we knew what was going to happen after Assad. And if we knew it would, I think they're going to have to do something like what Syria did, because it's just such a, like what Lebanon did, because it's such a complicated society.
Another nearby, almost intractable problem, it seems, is the dealing with Iran and developing a nuclear weapon. Do you have a sense that that could be preventing that could be accomplished diplomatically, or do you think eventually it's going to have to be some form of force to stop it?
I have no idea. That's the truth. I think it's the toughest of all problems. You don't want the Iranians to be a nuclear power. On the other hand, I have seen several times in the last few years manifestations of opinion in Israel among former leaders of the military and the intelligence services that they think a military effort to take out their nuclear capacity could cost more than it brings benefits. So I think there's some chance that it will work, but I'm not wildly hopeful about the diplomatic avenue. I think we have hurt them some. They're having an election now in Iran. There is some chance that the election would have an impact on this in terms of how the new leaders think about it. But I don't want to say too much about that, because I will tell you this. It is, in my opinion, it is the most difficult of all problems that the president faces now. And the consequences could be pretty severe. I don't think that Iran, if they had a nuclear weapon, if we did what we would drop one on Israel or send one to us. But I think the danger is that if the Iranians get a nuclear weapon, then the Saudis might want one to counter them. and the Qataris could have the money to have one, and the United Arab Emirates have the money to have one. Pretty soon you got 4 or 5 nuclear powers over there. And nuclear weapons are expensive to build, secure, and maintain. And the real problem you have is the more people you have walking around with nuclear weapons, the more storage you have of fissile materials. And if you get just like this much, like a Girl Scout cookies amount of fissile materials, and you put it in, let's say, in the fertilizer bomb that Timothy McVeigh used in Oklahoma City. Y'all remember that? The Oklahoma City bomb? You put just a little nuclear material in there, it could take out 20% of a major city. So that's what you don't want. You don't want, I'm more worried about the proliferation of it and the so-called suitcase nukes than actual country uses a bomb, because if Iran used a bomb, they would be history. And I'm not worried about that. I wouldn't say not worried, but I'm not very worried about it. You have to assume they're not totally irrational, but I'm worried about an arms race, and I'm worried about the fissile material leaking out and, you know, being stolen or bought or whatever. I think I worry about it quite a lot. But the world's made a pretty good run through the last several years when it didn't happen. It didn't happen out of India, it didn't happen out of Pakistan, so we just got to keep working at it.
In your post-presidency, you've developed a relationship with President Bush, working on I think in Haiti and in some other areas, with his father in Indonesia. Tell us about that experience, working with someone on the other side of the political fence.
Well, I worked with the first President Bush on several things. First of all, when I was a governor, I did, on education issues. And I liked him a lot. And then we had that race in '92, and it sort of drove us apart a little bit. But I would, you'd be amazed. I didn't carry much of a grudge, maybe because I won, but I don't think just because of that. They had people in the British government over there looking in my passport records to see if I tried to give up my American citizenship. And some of my friends were outraged. I was ecstatic. I said, they're wasting their time. We want people to waste their time who are trying to defeat us. Call them with some rumors, but then we began to work when the tsunami happened, and then when Katrina happened. The second President Bush was in office, and he asked us to work together in those areas. And we began to, and we both had a really good time. And what can I say? I love the guy. I think he's a good man. And he's almost 90 now. You know, he's getting on up there. But I saw him not very long ago at his son's library dedication. We had a good time. And then when the Haiti earthquake occurred, President Obama asked second President Bush and I to do some work. And I think we did some pretty unique things down there. We raised a fund that was designed to build longer lasting changes to help businesses start and do things that would help the economy for years into the future, and I hope we succeeded at that. So it's been a great experience, but it's really personal with me. I like the Bush family, and I didn't stop disagreeing with them all. as Barbara says, you know, I'm like the black sheep son who drifts off. Every big family has one that just kind of gets away. I mean, you know, I didn't change. The second President Bush, George W. Bush, and I, we have still hilarious arguments about foreign policy and Iraq and tax policy and healthcare policy and other things. We didn't stop disagreeing, but I think the issue is, do you believe that this long process of disagreeing is supposed to produce a deal? That is, isn't there a point at which it's more important to do something than to do nothing? That's the thing that frustrates me. I mean, when all my life, when I was a governor, I had Republicans in my state legislature who voted against me more often than not, but we became friends, and we got a surprising amount done together. And, you know, and even when I was in the middle of brutal fights in Washington, my door was open and we still did things together. That's what I think, you know, that's what we really need to get back to. The lesson I took from the movie, the Lincoln movie. Did you all see the Lincoln movie? You know, the Daniel, remember? Okay, so it was written up, the spin on it was Daniel Day-Lewis is the greatest film actor of our generation, and he inhabited Lincoln. That's true. That's a true fact. But that's not the important thing for you as an American citizen in 2013. The important thing for you is that Abraham Lincoln spent the last 11 or 12 weeks of his life as a politician, knowing that the war would soon be over, knowing that to end slavery he had to have a constitutional amendment, smartly concluding that even though he'd have a much more friendly Congress in a few months, he needed to pass it now so he could get it out and get it ratified before the southern states came back into the Union, because it takes 3/4 of the states to ratify a constitutional amendment. So here's old Lincoln making all these political deals that many people perhaps find distasteful. I was thrilled by it. I thought it was great. And I watched this and I thought, this is how the system is supposed to work. Even though some of it was rather unseemly and some of them wanted jobs and things, he ended slavery. It's a reasonably important issue. And so that's what I'd like to leave you all with. I'm not being very articulate today. I've been a little under the weather, but I spent my lifetime in politics having fights and tough campaigns and all kinds of stuff, but I always thought in the end we would get something done. And that's what I think we have to get back to. It is diminishing to a country to have politics as a sideshow where nothing ever happens. It is ennobling if something gets done, even if it's not perfect. And the process for getting things done has never been perfect. Mark Twain once said that 2 things people should never watch being made: sausage and laws. And so we got to see Lincoln make sausage in that movie, and I thought it was thrilling. And it proved to me that he was a truly great person, because he didn't take his shoes off and rest after the Civil War was won, and because he was not ashamed to be a politician in the best sense.
As you can see, I've been given the hook. But as a final question, to look ahead in the year, what do you hope in your global initiative or personally to accomplish? What's on your agenda in this coming year that you hope you can are able to achieve?
Well, I've just checked one of those boxes on this trip to Latin America. I think we have finally come up with an economic model that will enable us to create a lot of jobs at the so-called bottom of the pyramid. The poorest people in the world, we've found a way to bring them into the private economy. And I'm thrilled about it. And if any of you want to know about it, you can write me and I'll tell you about it. But the agricultural things we're doing, I think, are profoundly important. I think the things that I worry about constantly are how are we going to create enough economic opportunity for people in wealthy countries and poor countries alike. And I'm thinking a lot about in a wealthy country, for example, like America, we have systems. We have to reform those systems all the time. You know, like the student loan reform bill that has to be updated every now and then. In a poor country, you have to build systems. So the other thing I'm trying to do this year, one other thing I'm trying to do is to make sure we get some more private investment in Haiti. They've never had a strong enough private economy. And therefore, the government is always looked at to do more than they can, particularly in a country that's that poor. So I've got a lot of good things going on in Haiti. And the final thing is that I hope by the end of this year, we will have a roadmap to where we're going in America on this wellness initiative I'm doing. We started off trying to reduce childhood obesity, and we've had some pretty good luck. For example, we signed agreements with soft drink companies that have reduced by 90% the total calories shipped to schools for consumption by kids in vending machines and the cafeteria. 90%. But we're now trying to deal with the fact that there are two big problems in terms of demographics and healthcare costs and quality of life. One is the childhood obesity issue. The other is just the simple size of the baby boom generation. I'm the oldest of the baby boomers, and if we consume healthcare dollars on a per capita basis at the same rate as our parents, we'll pretty much bankrupt our kids and their ability to raise our grandkids. So we've got to stay healthier. And I have been working on a reasonable, practical strategy that I hope will accelerate that process. And by the end of the year, I think I'll have a better feel for that. But that's really important to me because I want us to leave America better off than we found it.
I think you can see once more that if President Clinton could run again, he'd win again. We have one more thing to do.
Well, you said you were a little under the weather and not very articulate. You seemed extremely articulate to me, and I want to thank you for an inspiring conversation.